Hello and welcome to the show. We start this week's Tuner Thursday with a Mitsubishi Evo 8 from Honourably Airborne. The Evo 8, we had one come out last week. It went pretty damn quickly, despite the fact that it was didn't have a huge amount of grip. So I was interested to see how this one would compare. Certainly on the statistics, this one has a little bit of a disadvantage. It's down on power. This one has 490 horsepower, about 20 lower than last week's one, about 15 less torque, 414, and is a little bit heavier at 2,622 pounds. Although that's still not too bad figures for the vehicle. It's still around the average, you know, for sort of power and for torque figures. And I'm still surprised by the weight that these cars get down to. These big four-wheel drive saloon cars, they're not too bad on the weight front. With this sort of slightly less power and slightly less torque and so on, the straight line speed does suffer in this vehicle. It's barely getting up to the 150 mile an hour mark as we come under braking for that first big stop. It is not a particularly fast car in a straight line. And even with the four-wheel drive system, yes, you can put all of the power down out of the corner very, very, very early. It just lacks acceleration. It feels quite slow in between some of the turns, and that is an important thing at Long Beach. With the nature of this circuit, the way that it is, sort of short straight followed by sort of a 90-degree corner followed by another short straight again, you want a quick accelerating car, and while the four-wheel drive does give you the traction, this just feels, I don't know, it feels a little bit more sluggish. I mean, I'm not talking a huge amount here. We're only talking a few horsepowers and torques and so on, but it does feel a little bit slower getting in between the corners, and certainly coming down that long straight, it does struggle for top end speed. On the flip side of that, though, this is a much nicer car to drive through the corners, whereas last week's one there was just a lack of grip. There wasn't understeer or oversteer as such, there was just a general lack of grip. This one, there was a lot more turning in it. There was a lot more grip through the corners. I could actually try and carry some corner speed around the turns. It was perhaps a little bit oversteery from time to time, and you can often get this with the slightly more powerful four-wheel drive cars. I mean, we're still talking almost 500 horsepower in this thing. You know, they will still slide around if you are a bit of a fool on the accelerator, and certainly there are plenty of tight corners and slow corners here that you can be a fool on when it comes to the power delivery. But for the most part, it was very well behaved. And yeah, provided you weren't stupid with it, you could carry decent corner speed. The curbs and the bumps, well, they're always something to be wary of. Mitsubishi dealt with them pretty well. I didn't have any major incidences, any major accidents from running over the curbs. Sure, it'll put it on two wheels and it may slide the back end about, but no, this Evo 8 dealt with them all very, very well. And the other plus side with this car, the brakes were pretty damn good as well, getting it stopped. Admittedly, it is not the fastest car in a straight line, so sort of the speeds you were going into a braking zone was slightly different to some of the other vehicles. But it did feel like a good vehicle to get slowed down, and all round, yeah, it was a good fun vehicle to drive. Up next, from a SWE Gamer 98, we have got a Renault 5 Turbo with the dreaded Turbo Rally engine in it. Never quite sure what to make of a car with this engine in it. It's a bit of a weird one to get used to. But the Renault 5 Turbo, I'm surprised we haven't seen one before, actually, because I was thinking that these could be quite a quick car when it comes to A-Class. This vehicle is a four-wheel drive version of the 5. We have 435 horsepower with 516 torque. The Turbo Rally engine is a peculiar thing. You get an awful lot of torque out of it. It's still a decent amount of power, considering the car only weighs 2,353 pounds. That power to weight ratio then is pretty damn good when it comes to this vehicle, and of course we've got that mountain of torque. Now this Renault 5 isn't the top of A-Class. I think it's about 677 PI, so it's one of the lower PI cars that we've had. I'm guessing you can't upgrade the Turbo Rally engine. Other than removing the restrictions, you can't upgrade it anymore. I think that's the maximum you can get out of it power-wise. So it isn't at the top of A-Class. It's still quite a 23 PI lower than the rest of the vehicles. So I feared that this might struggle around here, and certainly straight line speed is not the Renault strong point. Another car that was struggling to get towards the 150 mile. I don't think it ever did get the 150. Can't quite remember into the first braking zone. It wasn't particularly quick in a straight line. And the thing with the turbo rally engine is it is a pain in the arse to get right. You have to change up gears before you hit the 6,000 RPM mark. After that, it massively drops down in power. So you've got to change gears quite early, which is slightly counterintuitive compared to the other vehicles that I've been driving. But again, this is another car with a short gear ratios, so you're changing gear a lot. If you change up at 6,000 RPM, it only then drops the revs to about 5, maybe a tiny bit lower, so there is a lot of gear changing going on. Much like the Evo 6 I had run around here, there is a lot of gear changes going on. With the with the Renault 5, you do fight it quite a lot. But being a four-wheel drive car, the mounting of torque and so on isn't too much of a problem for this. It dealt with all of the power and all of the torque very, very well. You could put it down over the corners nice and easily, and yeah, you didn't have too many issues. Again, yes, you could slide the car, but most of the time that was because you clonked a curb. On the whole, it was a very well-behaved vehicle, especially considering it is very light. It dealt with the curbs and so on. If I did hit them, it dealt with them pretty well. I mean, okay, if you clonk them really hard, I could get it up onto two wheels, but on the whole, provided you don't drive like an utter tool, yeah, I had no problems, and that's rare for a short wheelbase car as light as this, dealing with them curbs. Normally they absolutely loathe them, but no, this was pretty good. Aside from the lack of actual sort of top end in this vehicle, the other thing that was maybe not bad, slightly disappointing, were the brakes on this. I expected it to be phenomenally good at slowing down because it doesn't weigh very much, tiny little wheelbase and so on. But it didn't get stopped as well as I expected. Had to brake a bit earlier than I was thinking you might get away with. You see here I was trying to push it down the braking, but no, couldn't quite get away with that. Yeah, a little bit disappointing on the brakes, but still a pretty good car. Up next we've got a Lotus Exige from Wild R-Blocks 360. Now you expect the Exiges to be a good handling car when it comes to a tight and twisty circuit. However, they do have their difficulties, as I promptly demonstrate, managing to bin it. Admittedly, that is the corner that will often have cars sliding on. I may have managed to put the Exige pointing backwards. I did that a couple of times in the first few laps. Yeah, they have their quirks, shall we say. They often suffer from the similar problem that plagues the KTM Crossbow and the Ariel Atom V8. They have an awful lot of turn-in and absolutely none of the rear-end grip, so they're incredibly twitchy and difficult to drive. This car is nowhere near as bad as it could be, but it's still a little bit there. You can still feel it when things go a slight bit wrong. As far as the statistics side of thing, well, we're never expecting the Lotus to be the most powerful car, and indeed, it's a mere 434 horsepower and 329 torque, so not a huge amount of power, not a huge amount of torque, but of course it is a very light vehicle, 2,270 pounds. Maybe not the lightest we've seen, but it's still a pretty damn good power to weight ratio that you get out of this vehicle. Now, traditionally, Lotus's weak point is the straights, but that wasn't the case with this Exige. It was one of the faster cars. Today, certainly, it was getting up towards the sort of 155 mile an hour mark, and that's not too bad down this long straight. You expect the Lotuses to be slow on the straights and quick through the corners, but this one certainly wasn't slow when it came to a straight line. The problem was when it came to the corners, things fell apart a little bit. It was a bit of a difficult car to drive. In many ways, I often felt myself kind of slightly overdriving the vehicle. I expected it to be very, very good on the brakes, and it actually wasn't. It wasn't that much better than, well, anything else I've driven. You were still having to brake at the similar braking boards to that of the Evo. In fact, I think you're having to brake earlier with this than you were with the Evo and the Renault. It didn't feel this sort of sharp on the brakes as I was expecting a Lotus Exige to feel, and the actual turns themselves, there wasn't as much overall grip again as I was thinking that I was going to get from the car. When you tried to carry quarter speed, you ended up kind of getting a little bit of understeer to start with, and then the minute you tried to go anywhere near the throttle, you got a huge amount of oversteer, as you will see me demonstrating through here. It wasn't a particularly understeery vehicle. There wasn't the cornering speed there, much like the Evo 8 that I drove last week, where there just wasn't the corner speed. There wasn't quite the turn-in with this car, and then there was still the oversteer on the exit. which made it a bit of a pain. It was not the easiest car that I've driven. It didn't quite drive, the sort of the way that you expect a Lotus Exige to drive. It just wasn't quite as sharp as I was expecting. Yeah, I did find myself sort of outbraking myself quite a lot, thinking that it was going to be a lot better on the brakes than it actually was. It was a little bit disappointing, perhaps, for an Exige, for a track car. I thought it would be very fast around a twisty, turny track such as this one. But yeah, I did have my issues with it. It certainly didn't like the curbs either, if you went near them. And our final vehicle for the day comes from Silent Flower. It is a Dodge Charger RT. I very much like the big muscle cars, and this is by far the most powerful vehicle that we have had in this series. 766 horsepower in this car, 755 torques. Admittedly, it is the heaviest vehicle that we've seen, I believe, 3,148 pounds. But when you look at the power to weight ratio, it's still not too shabby, because there is just a huge amount of power and a huge amount of torque with this vehicle. So as you can imagine, the straight line speed is very, very good in this car. It's about 165 miles an hour, depending on how brave you dare be on the brakes down the main front straight. And of course, in between the corners, the minute you point it in a straight, it is very quick with all of this power. Even with the weight there, it is still a very, very quick car. Of course, the big fear with a muscle car like this one is the handling. What's it going to be like when it comes to the corners? It's all very well and good being fast accelerating, but there are lots of quite tight corners to negotiate on this Long Beach circuit. And well, the Charger was quite impressive, I have to say, because it has such large rear tyres. Even though there is much horsepower, you don't have too much problem with traction. So out of that final hairpin, you can really boot it, and the car doesn't slide. I've had four-wheel drive cars that slide more coming out of that final corner, because the tyres are so big, you can get the power down and it will fire itself down this this start-finish straight. And again, through the rest of the turns, it doesn't have a huge amount of oversteer problems, and I think largely to do with some very, very large tyres. Admittedly, there is a slight lack of grip. Certainly there is a fair amount of understeer when you turn into a corner. There just isn't the grip in this vehicle. It is a huge tank of a car that weighs a lot more than the other stuff that I've driven, so it's not going to be as lively through the turns as some of the other vehicles. There is a fair bit of understeer when you turn. You see a little bit of trouble getting stopped with that one. And the brakes, they aren't fantastic on this either. You do have to brake quite nice and early. They're not terrible, mind. The brakes on this were slightly better than I was expecting, in all honesty. Yeah, they really weren't absolutely terrible, but there is just more car to try and get slowed down. This was another vehicle, actually, that wasn't at the top of A-class either with PI. I think this one was 688. So it's got the standard engine. I'm guessing this is the maxed out standard engine. So yeah, there was could have been a little bit more perhaps. I don't know if you could drop any more weight out of it or not, but there was certainly still more PI. You might have even got this towards 800 horsepower with a different engine. But yeah, it was a better car to drive than I expected. I thought I would have more troubles. When you think of a 750 horsepower, 750 torque muscle car on a narrow street circuit, you expect it to be hell. You expect it to be an incredibly tough car to fight around. I didn't fight this car around the circuit at all. Admittedly, from cockpit view, the bonnet scoop was quite annoying. That's I don't like that bonnet scoop particularly, especially since I drive cockpit view most of the time. It just blocks quite a lot of the visibility. But aside from that, yeah, this car was a real surprise. Drove far better than I expected. You can see I had less oversteer problems with the Dodge than I did with the Exige. On to the times, and the fastest vehicle for the day was the Mitsubishi Evo 8, a 124.7. It goes in the very busy mid-table, and this area has become the Mitsubishi section. All the Evos that have been raced are within 0.115 of a second. That's it. All of the Mitsubishi Evos are covered by that tiny margin. In fact, all the cars on this screen here are covered by less than 0.3 of a second. The Renault 5, despite not being the top of A-class, it still did a 124.9 with that turbo rally engine. That is incredibly impressive from the Renault 5 to have gone that quickly. Yeah, that's probably the surprise time of the day. There is another surprise further down for the Exige that I really struggled to get any lap time out of. I couldn't get it to go particularly quickly. A 125.8 for the Lotus. I don't know what it is. One of those cars, I'm not quite sure what it was about it, but it just was not particularly quick around the track, and he gets beaten by the Charger. A 25.435 from the Dodge. Not bad for a great big heavyweight muscle car, and it drove far better than it had any right to, far better than I ever expected a Charger to do around this track. But there we go. Some interesting results in this week's episode. And yeah, the mid-table is getting incredibly crowded. Anyway, that is it for this video, guys. So thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.